Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
What's that?
We have a flat roof, but
He
it's
talked
like,
to Russell. He
Oh, it
came
is
over,
flat.
thought he'd go over and put coffee.
it just had a big
Yes.
ice, like an ice.
So a cooperative,
in the water
so
can't go
it
under
just
the
depends
fence.
though.
Right,
Like,
like, it's not the
find
right
the
time.
hole.
So we're gonna replace all the screws in the summer.
The screws.
Just the screws in the roof. Like,
Tin roof.
This is the
Okay,
non-profit.
Flat tinner?
yeah.
Flat tinner.
Connect to
Okay,
that
so,
network.
Have a rubber on it?
yeah, but there's investors of
Yeah.
co-op that aren't
That's not got
shareholders.
screws in it.
So the original roof is underneath.
Not
And
shareholders.
it was just.
Like, so they're not.
It started to get a little funky, like it's a tar roof. You got strapped and they.
Where are you supposed to go over that?
Tin
Yeah,
on top
it's a
of it,
different-
aluminum.
I know where the pile is.
Hi.
No.
How are you?
Hi.
You're at the head of the table.
We're gonna have to deal with something.
Being late.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
you
they
can't
had
fly.
that issues and there was.
Come on, you like being on display.
What is it?
He come in, put new rubber, all rubber membrane
Oh, see, that's what we need.
on there and it just, yeah, leveled it.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
we got copies.
Rubber
This is all
membrane that went right up.
Yeah.
I think.
Edge.
So we can hand this out.
Oh,
then.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a drain and
Here.
Very long, or was it before?
One of those
glued
things.
it on.
Okay.
Oh, he's at Molson's.
And then what did they put over the rest?
Hey, folks.
Can, right?
Hey Kyle, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
That wouldn't
Okay.
be nice down at those maps.
We did that on the.
We can't hear you.
Did you get this?
I remember
Hold on
seeing
two
it.
seconds, Cal. What's that?
And I never got the email. I got
Yeah, that's
this
fine.
one.
I'm just trying to figure out, is this on?
So some sort of thing over top of the whole yard. Super good.
No, it's our owl.
Quonset, but just the top.
Big ass pole shit. Guess that.
Got some pigeons in there.
Just
Yeah,
for
the
your-
blue lights on.
Can you hear me
Yeah,
now?
I can turn it on.
Oh, there he is.
I can't hear you, but it could be on our end because
Although I
we're just
need to
getting
get
our
someone to look
owl
at
set
it.
up here, but it's not, it can't be working because I'm not seeing it in.
I think
The blue
they're
light's
up the
there.
ridge, right?
Yeah,
Well, he can't see you and you can see him or
I
what?
think some of it.
We can
Some of
see,
the
he
ridge-
The top.
Some of it, where they butt up is like not, is on the bottom of the ridge. So I think the water's going in that ridge and then going down.
There you go.
Oh, I
there,
heard
you can
something.
see us now.
I just heard
Okay.
it. Click.
Can you talk straight? I think I can hear.
Does it sound okay?
Talk again?
That's a bit better.
Again? 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3.
I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
to turn it up anymore, but yeah, we can hear you now.
Hey, there we go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you guys great.
Oh, look,
Alright.
we can see what he can see.
Uh-huh.
I haven't seen that before.
Yes, so. All right, so we could probably start, hey?
Yeah.
So we've got Kyle on from Cooperatives first. And he's going to give us a little bit more information on cooperatives. And maybe answer some questions for us. Yeah. So Kyle, we have a number of people here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of us, I think, altogether. So I think I'll just hand it over to you and hopefully everybody can hear and see ya.
Yeah, that sounds great. I appreciate it. And good evening, everyone. It's nice to virtually meet you, kind of. I don't know if folks are familiar at all with our organization, Cooperatives First, but we're a nonprofit organization based in Saskatoon, but we work across the 4 Western Canadian provinces. We were created by Federated Co-op and the cooperative retailing system to provide support for groups that are wanting to learn about cooperatives, and we provide supports for groups who are starting cooperative businesses. So we kind of do a bit of consulting work. Because we're funded by Federated, all of the supports that we provide are at no cost to the groups we work with. We have worked with we've helped create about 109 cooperatives, some in housing, some in investment, and basically all sectors of the economy. So lots of different experience. And we've worked with a handful of folks, communities and entrepreneurs in Manitoba. Yeah, and housing is of course a pretty hot topic everywhere we go, both on the affordability front and especially because we do a lot of work in rural communities, the availability side of things. And I understand from talking with some folks in your town that that's really the area of concern, is that there's just not a lot of availability. And I guess when it comes to housing co-ops, there are, it's a great model for especially rural communities to consider for a couple of reasons. And we have a saying at Cooperatives First that form should follow function. And because cooperatives are a really flexible way of doing business that are really designed to help communities build the services and the infrastructure or the businesses that they need, the function that you need that organization to play in your community should really kind of dictate what kind of organization we create. Because a housing cooperative is a pretty specific way of doing business and doing housing in Canada. There's over 2,000 housing co-ops in Canada, and most of them are not-for-profit, tenant-run organizations. I think there's about 60 or so across Manitoba. But what we've seen a lot of interest in from rural communities, and I think is the primary interest here, is a more community-led sort of investment to help spur development, to bring together some financial capital and make some investments in housing that aren't otherwise happening. And there's a couple ways of going about that. Because again, form follows function. Picking the right form to match the problem you have is really quite key. So from that community-led perspective, there's again a nonprofit option, which works great if your goal is to harness grants. And there's lots of funding on offer through Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And I think there's going to be more funds available from the government of Manitoba, especially to support things like affordable housing, seniors housing, things like that. And we have got pretty good examples of folks doing that work. We've worked with a group in the arm of Piney down in the southeast corner of Manitoba. They created a nonprofit cooperative that is going to provide ideally 20 beds for seniors care. And the other model that we see more and more communities interested in is something called a community investment co-op. And a community investment co-op is a pretty new approach, but one that makes a lot of sense for rural communities. The idea started in Nova Scotia and got really popular in the West, because what we're kind of seeing in a lot of communities is, especially rural places, they don't always have the tools to create the kind of developments and support the kind of businesses and build the kind of infrastructure that they need. But it's not usually from a lack of financial resources. I've worked with rural communities all over Canada, and there's financial resources at work. There's financial resources available. Everyone has savings, and those savings are doing stuff elsewhere. And so an investment co-op really challenges the idea, why not take some of our savings, which we're already investing anyway, and invest them back at home where we can see that work. And an investment co-op is really designed to help bring together ordinary community members, business owners, people who want to invest in their local community, and it creates that vehicle. The co-op's primary purpose is to raise funds from community members and then invest in local projects. And housing, being such a critical infrastructure to attract and retain workers and just grow communities, is becoming an area where we're seeing more of these co-ops make investments. And there's a variety of ways we've seen folks do that. The first community I've ever worked with that started trying this was Sangudo, Alberta. I don't know if folks are familiar with Sangudo. It's a real little town, about 300 people, northwest of Edmonton. And they had a pretty poor supply of housing. And they really didn't have any option to attract folks. So the investment co-op, which had already been at work and had supported some other businesses, they did a call for capital with the intention of buying 3 vacant lots, and then leading the development of 3 family homes. Hadn't been done before, so they tried one. They led the development, and because the local contractor and the local hardware store owner were also investor members of the co-op, they agreed to delay payment until the project was cash positive. So again, good flexibility just by bringing together some of these movers and shakers in town to support this sort of community investment idea. They built a home and they started renting it out because the Alberta housing market did a bit of a slump. So they rented it out for about a year, so made good money on that. They owned the house outright. There was no mortgage. And when the housing prices ticked back up, they sold the property to a new family that had relocated to town. And in doing so, made a pretty healthy profit on the sale. And with that money, they were able to return dividends back to the investing members. So that's one way of doing this sort of work. We're working with another group in Manitoba, still very early stages. And what they're hearing from their local developers is that the working with banks at this point in time is just challenging. They can't quite make the margins work between interest rates and the scale to which they're able to build in smaller communities. And so that community is having, and they're in, again, very early stages, but their goal is to either provide more flexible terms in loans to developers, or enter into development partnerships with a housing developer. And so in doing so, own a portion of the project and realize the gains once the project is developed and sold. So again, that's a similar way to get capital that, again, already exists in the community into building homes and expanding the housing supply, but different ways of going about it. And yeah, so that's community investment co-ops kind of in a nutshell on how we've kind of seen them get involved with housing developments. But the real benefit, I would say, from a community investment co-op is that it gives you a flexible tool. You know, the co-op could invest in a development itself and lead that development if that's what's hanging up new home building. It could provide loans, it could provide equity investments, venture debt. It gives you a flexible source of capital for projects that most banks or other traditional lenders really aren't really willing to entertain. And that's a really, really flexible, good model for rural communities that have these kinds of challenges. And if you're interested in that, our organization does this sort of support, again, at no cost. Our real purpose is to work with groups through the process of starting up a co-op, figuring out the legal, the governance, and the operational side of things. Yeah, that's so in a nutshell, co-op solutions to housing. Did folks have questions on any of that?
I guess you did it pretty good.
What would be a benefit for a cooperative versus a corporation in this sort of, if you did community-led investments?
They're pretty similar, I would say. When you know, you get into the ABCs of it, the actual operations are quite similar. How co-ops are governed, of course, is a bit different. If you're, I'm assuming you all are part of a local co-op retailer. The same principle, you know, of equal membership carries over. So regardless of how much you can invest into the co-op, everyone has an equal say at the end of the day. And that's a pretty good way for communities to do business. The way that most of these co-ops are set up is they'll have a flat cost for membership in the business, $100, $250, what have you. And that buys you your ownership, your one vote at a meeting, and you can run for the board, you can vote for the board, what have you. And then most of these co-ops will also require that you purchase at least one investment share. Most of them use investment shares or preferred capital as their tool for raising money from investors. And again, you can price those at what have you. Most co-ops choose, I think, 500 or $1,000 is the preferred price for those. And so people can buy in for, at least 500, $1,000, $600, what have you. So it gets more people in the community around the table. And again, they're bought in because they have that equal say alongside all their neighbors. And then for those who can invest more and have that capacity to invest more, they can. And the way that these co-ops then issue dividends is based on the investment capital held by the members. So you hold 3 shares, you're going to get 3 times the amount as someone who has 1 when the co-op issues dividends. And the dividends that the co-ops issue, again, is usually directly tied to the revenue generated and how profitable they are. So, for example, with Sangudo, the year that they were renting the place out, dividends are okay. But the year they sold it and had a good, $40,000, $50,000 margin on it, then dividends were really good.
I know this is just my opinion, but I think what I'm looking at for this town is something like a 4-plex or 8-plex. Something that a young person coming to town to work at a local grocery store or whatever. He's 19 years old, isn't ready to put money into a house. He wants to rent a quality apartment and that's what I think this town maybe partly needs anyway, maybe needs more housing, but rental, like a rental block of some sort, so.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can make that work with your housing cooperative?
You certainly could. Yeah, I mean, the equation for these is replicatable. Obviously for a 4-plex, the land you'd require for it, the building materials, you're just increasing the total project costs. So it could certainly work. And again, most communities that we've worked with, I think y'all are in a similar case, the availability of homes is quite not good. So usually there's people who are always looking for rentals. As you say, especially if they're relocating to the community, they're working in the town, and they're not ready to maybe buy a home. That's certainly an option. Yeah. So again, renting it out makes perfect sense as a steady revenue stream for the co-op. And then if the goal is at some point to sell it, again, that gives the co-op its capital back. So it could maybe invest in the next project as well.
Do some of these community investment co-ops, do they use their assets that they get from all the investors or the members to get finances from a bank? Do you as well? Like, let's say if you didn't have enough, but get enough to, like, I don't know, put a down payment on something, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Use as leverage in a financial institution, or?
The ones we've seen do home development tend not to. Usually the goal for raising capital is the full amount, usually. Again, because you have this tool, you can get creative with it. So you certainly could, if you're doing a huge development and you can raise half from equity, basically, that's a pretty good pitch then to make to a bank. What we have seen a lot of these groups do is they'll do loans as well. to businesses. Because again, another challenge a lot of rural communities have is they have businesses that can't access good financing. So some of them will use co-ops like this to either invest or back them, and then use that investment to leverage debt. Yeah. That Sangudo model that I mentioned, that's their primary business, is helping create businesses. And they've done it a whole bunch of ways. They've issued just straight commercial loans to businesses. They've also bought buildings, rent and financed the renovation, and then leased them to business owners, and again saw revenue streams through that. And then once the business owner can retain enough earnings themselves, they buy the co-op out or enter into a partnership with them. Again, you can get pretty creative, pretty flexible with the financial situation.
So when you're setting up the co-op, can it be specifically for this one housing project? Like, so if you're trying to sell it as, this is our problem and this is how it's gonna get fixed,
Yep.
we would like you to invest in this, instead of, I just think that us saying to somebody, well, you know, we could support a business here or do something else. It may be easier to sell it at the beginning if it was just for something specific.
Yeah.
Like everybody is here around the table right now because of housing.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
does it have to be for everything?
Doesn't have to be, no. There's two sides of these, I would say. So there's the kind of the legal bit and the governance side of things that creates the co-op. And in doing so, you identify its purpose. So you could certainly restrict its purpose to home development. So there's that side of things where, again, if you're creating the co-op, you're creating for the purposes of supporting home development. Again, that could be the core business of the co-op. On the other side of things is the regulation that exists in this space. If you're raising money from the public, obviously the government gets its haunches up a little bit about that. And so there are securities regulations that govern this sort of work. There's exemptions that most co-ops will use to lower the reporting requirement, but essentially you need to let the Manitoba Securities Commission know, why are we raising this money? How are we going to use it? And how can people expect to get their money back? And in that case, the government really likes it when these co-ops have a clear project in mind. And so you'll then take basically a document that's been stamped by the Securities Commission that says, we're raising money to finance a fourplex for rental purposes. We're raising this much. We're going to build it in this period. And then we expect people will get their money back. And then usually they'll also have a risk disclosure. Yeah. So again, the Sangudo project I mentioned, they've had 7 projects, 7 calls for capital, where they go through that process each time. So everyone who's investing in a project knows exactly what they're investing in. If you're not comfortable with it, that's fine. You just take a step back. But if you see this as a really good opportunity, yep, we need more housing, I want to put my money in that, then you certainly can.
One of the ideas we talked about was having a retail or a business on the main floor with units above. Is there an issue with combining the two?
I can't imagine. Honestly, the local government folks would probably be the best one to ask about that, because zoning and local regulations would probably inform that a little bit more. But again, usually if you've got local government around the table from the get-go, then you've got the right people to have that conversation with.
Bingo.
Yeah. And that's also, I mean, that's something we always recommend to these groups. Again, because cooperatives are really designed to be a more community-based way of meeting your needs and the needs of your community, they tend to have that kind of broader community buy-in that other ways of businesses can, but don't always have. And so a lot of these conversations get started with support from local government so that they end up being around the table. Because again, the primary purpose of this thing is perhaps, yes, to make money, but it's also to provide some sort of support and service to our community. to allow it to grow.
So I think one of our next steps after we talk here, could you tell us about what you offer in terms of a feasibility study and what you need from us?
Sure. So a lot of our work with groups is in the pretty early stage, figuring out a structure to solve the problem that they're working on. It sounds like y'all have done some good thinking about that. So one of the early supports that we recommend groups go through is we do provide incorporation support to get a structure in place. And one of the reasons we do that is it's a good way of making sure that the people who are supporting the co-op step up, create the thing, and sign the dotted line. So then people are really in as members of this co-op. It also gives flexibility, or not flexibility, but it allows them to be more prepared so that when funding opportunities come up, they can jump on it right away. A lot of groups we've worked with end up asking us, can we have this done in a week because we need a bank account to apply for this grant. So we always recommend incorporating early because then you can take advantage of all those opportunities. From there, we do offer feasibility assessments, business coaching, what have you. Our entrepreneur in residence, Kathy Edwards, who in a past life was a lawyer, but is now her day job as a home developer, but she does work with us on a consulting basis. She does work with groups that apply for that support to tease out either the feasibility of their project, to understand the viability, the operations model, or if they need to take a plan to a bank, she can also help prepare their plan, their financials. And a lot of that is supplemented with tools and content that we've provided online. We have a website called Co-op Creator, coopcreator.ca. On there's lots of tools to help groups map out their financials, map out their governance model, figure out how to make a business work. And we've also got an app that we use to help people create a business plan. And then once we're past all these things and the co-op's moving forward, we also provide governance training to help co-ops understand what their responsibilities are as a board of directors, what reporting obligations they need to meet, to again, give folks the tools and the knowledge they need to be a successful co-op.
And the feasibility assessment support is free as well?
Yep. We have limited resources to allocate to it. And so there is an application process that we do every quarter. And then we just judge based on where groups are, what their level of need is, and especially if it's in an innovative area.
Now, is that a feasibility study for the investment cooperative, if we need one or not, or is that a feasibility study for the project that we're thinking of doing?
Generally, we encourage groups to be more specific as possible. So ideally, they would have a project in mind, and then Kathy would be able to help them assess the viability of that. For example, there's a group, we have hosted a webinar on Monday that featured a co-op that is doing not housing development per se, but more short-term rentals, because they've got a lot of folks staying in the community and then leaving for a month or so at a time. And that was their project, was they wanted to buy a commercial property that has ground floor office space, clinic space, and main floor or second floor that can do these short-term rentals, kind of like efficiency units. And so that was the project they had in mind. They have the building in mind. They know the seller, the land price, all that. And then Kathy worked out 3 different phases with them. So a low revenue model, a medium revenue model, and then all the bells and whistles model to assess whether or not this would be a viable project for generating community investment. And it was. Yeah. Yeah.
So in this community project, so once it's up and running and you've got the cooperative all figured out and you've got the project all figured out, I guess there would probably you'd have to have a line item in there or a percentage of just for administration, right? Like you normally see these projects hire someone and pay them to do like a bookkeeping job or like just the reporting of to the company's office and all that kind of stuff.
At minimum, I would say they all have a bookkeeper, just for setting things up, processing certain things, and then having someone on contract is obviously the most flexible model there. Just so that you probably only need, you know, an hour or two here and there for a co-op like this. Some of them will contract a local service provider. Some have worked with Community Futures to help facilitate this. There was a group in Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, that was had the economic development coordinator as a kind of staff person. And that's particularly helpful in that early stage where you're raising capital. Someone who can basically process checks, take in money, keep a record, that sort of thing. I don't think there's any of these that have a full-time staff member. Usually a contract arrangement is the best option. Yeah. And there's all kinds of supports out there to fit different needs. There's a fellow I work with who does consulting work. He does management services on a consulting basis with co-ops like this that do renewable energy projects in Alberta. And then there's another couple groups, another co-op that's being created right now that's intended to provide some management services and some of the back-end supports for co-ops like that. So yeah, there's definitely referrals we could make for that sort of exact work.
And in your time with the co-op there, how long does it normally take for something to get started up? Let's say from like this meeting, we wanted to do this tonight to get it get to the investment stage where we can start selling memberships. Does that take a while or?
It varies quite a bit, I would say. The biggest holdup is usually around clarity of purpose. If everyone's on the same page and they kind of have that same end goal in mind, and you can relay that information, and again, we can help a little bit with articulating that, that can really expedite the process. Because then from, you know, having those at least 3 members to incorporate a co-op, getting things filed to, okay, now we're out in the community raising funds, you know, it could be a month or 2. One of the other folks we had on the webinar on Monday, they used one of these co-ops to buy the cafe in town because the business owner retired. He was just going to close it because he couldn't find a buyer. So they created an investment co-op, and they incorporated at the end of June. They started raising money mid-July, and then they had it bought at the end of the summer. Yeah.
So would we be able to complete the feasibility study prior to incorporating? Or do we have to do the other way?
Yeah, generally encourage groups to incorporate first.
It's free. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you said we only need 3 people to sit on
Incorporate.
the co-op board
Yep.
to be the executive.
You need 3 people to incorporate.
Yes. Yeah. Generally, we encourage more.
Yeah,
For
yes.
like this, where you're probably, I don't know, at 10, 15, 20, 50 members, you know, I would aim for 10. But yeah, 3 is the bare minimum to get incorporated with the company's office.
I imagine concept to conception is probably determined on the build itself as well, right?
Well, and this is the thing too. Housing is weird in Canada, right? Like, there's just regulation that you don't face in other things. So like our souk group cafe, right? They had to lease a space, have the equipment, get the staff. I don't know, it took them 12 weeks, start to finish, right? From the idea to, okay, it's running as a co-op. Housing, there's a bunch of regulation that you need to kind of work through. So again, having local government around the table, because they set a lot of that regulation, is really helpful. But yeah, I mean, we've gone to a lot of conferences where home development is a topic of conversation. And a lot of folks there say, you know, it takes longer to get the approvals than it takes to build a house. Yeah. Now, there are, I mean, incentives for this as well. Our client down in the arm of Piney, they've got the rural municipality, a neighboring First Nation, and then one of the towns in the area. They're all on board. Their goal is to put in an application for the housing accelerator funds that the feds currently have on offer, so that they can kind of, again, have the funds to expedite some of their local processes around zoning and even utilities hookups.
What percentage of these cooperatives would you say are for profit? Community-led ones.
Yeah, that's a good question. Boy, that'd be hard to say. For the ones that do housing specifically, the nonprofit model is more common, but they're all older. I would say that. Like Saskatchewan's got a bunch of these nonprofit models for seniors housing, especially. But I mean, to speak frankly, the provinces used to fund housing a lot more rigorously than they do today. So there was just more money available. And so in that case, if you got enough volunteers and you need the service, a nonprofit option will get you this, you know, pretty significant grant. And then you just borrow the rest. So that was a model that worked really well for a long time. It's only, I would say, recently that this for-profit community investment option has been tried to do home development and rentals and home sales. Because again, no one else is doing it. The folks in Piney chose that nonprofit route because they needed to ensure that there was an affordability mechanism as well. So they're gonna, and again, in doing so, you can get, again, creative with your funding model. I think they've raised something like 1.2 million already. Some of it as a contribution from the RM, some as a contribution from a local nonprofit that does housing support. They've applied for a handful of grants and got those that, again, you need to be nonprofit to apply for. And I think one of the towns also donated the land for the site. And then they're going to kick in the application to CMHC's National Housing Strategy. And that comes with a combination of grants and interest loans. So again, it's kind of what you need it to do kind of informs how you go about doing it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or?
Does Manitoba have the same distinctions as Ontario between nonprofit and not-for-profit?
I'm not as familiar with
Not-for-profit?
Ontario's.
Okay, just that there is a difference between the two, and the not-for-profit, you can at least have some profit sitting aside, but.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
all the nonprofit entities, again,
They
go
all-
above even. Yeah. At least for the purposes of building a reserve fund. And there is, under the Manitoba Cooperatives Act, the nonprofit designation is called a community service cooperative. So when you do that, it has a few boxes that basically meet the same requirements as a nonprofit corporation.
So investors that put money in won't see. Like, well, I guess you said you can get dividends, but it might not be a very big return on investment. If it's nonprofit.
It's hard to, as a nonprofit, I wouldn't even consider this as a nonprofit per se.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the goal is to raise money from community members as an investment, I would, yeah, structure as a for-profit co-op so that you've actually got the mechanism to do it and then return the capital to members. If the goal is to raise money through grants, then the nonprofit's your better option. But again, you in doing that, you do sign up for at least 24 months of applying for something, waiting, applying for something else, waiting. And that's our folks in Piney are in it for the long haul, fortunately. And so, yeah, they're a couple of years into their project.
So you had mentioned for the for-profit co-op model, and then you said something about rents is better for the not-for-profit co-op model. Can you still do rents? Like if we were to build an apartment block and rent for the for-profit, that's okay too, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What is there any difference between renting it with a for-profit co-op opposed to a not-for-profit co-op?
No, none at all. Again, I would say that the big distinction is usually with the grant revenue or money that you can seek.
Just the grants, okay. Gotcha.
If you're helping seniors, you'll get money.
Yep. And again, you can get creative with these things. I haven't worked with a group that's done it yet. I've heard more of this from the States. There's more bigger mid-sized towns. You could certainly raise private capital through an investment co-op to lead a development, a home development or an apartment development, and then sell that to a not-for-profit housing co-op that's tenant owned and can apply for the co-op development, the housing co-op funds that are also available through CMHC. So you can get creative with these things.
So are there any grants at all through the government for if you're for profit?
No.
I looked hard.
Okay.
So what about if you went the other way? What if you, oh no, that might not make sense. I was gonna say, what if you had a not-for-profit, use the funding to build the building and then sold it to the for-profit investors that then made profit off of it?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
That makes
Is
sense
it?
immediately.
Boy. You're signing for a headache, though, I will say. 'Cause, yeah, you're gonna get some grant funding, but the government does make you work for it for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I looked
yeah,
at the applications.
Yeah, usually the reason you'd form, the community investment co-op is because you have money in the community.
Yeah.
That's going to expedite the process.
Gotcha. Right? Anything else?
No, I think like it probably depends who's around the table, but at our last meeting, which it's generally like the same people except for a few, like the idea was pretty clear that they wanted it to be like an 8-plex apartment at a certain price point for rent. Location, potential discussed. So they seem to be pretty clear on what they want to be able to start like incorporating.
Well, and I mean, the one thing with housing, and again, we've worked on a handful of these projects, assessing the feasibility of them is pretty straightforward. Because there's usually relatively good data available for what it costs to build in town. Usually you can find, or at least a comparable community. You can find good building data through industry reports on what it costs for, say, a square foot on a set of townhouses or an eightplex, or I don't know if they have an eightplex specifically, but you get my point. And then you can really just then use that as your baseline, scale up, add, say, a 15% contingency cost. And then if you've got, say, I don't know, $5 million project, how much do you need then from, say, 50 community members? Raise the money. How much can you expect then in rent? Say, I don't know, $1,100 by 8 units, $8,800 a month over the course of 12 years, subtracting any expenses, and then there's your profit. Because again, if it's fully financed by the investor members, all that money can just get released at the end of the day as dividends back to those investors. Yeah. And the model works pretty well because, you know, if any one person could do this, they would. And then they would build it and reap all the benefits. But usually if we've got 10, 15, 20, 25 people, well, now we can definitely make it work because most people have some monies that they can divert to this sort of investment. And I should say as well, many of these co-ops, these community investment co-ops, you can register with select organizations. One of them is the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation. It has a program where it can handle RRSP contributions or TFSA contributions. So you would just register with them, give them the information about your RRSP, and then they can have a portion of your RRSP diverted to invest in your local community investment co-op. So you're not actually coming up with an extra $5,000. You're taking money you've already got invested and just get it home.
That's good. That's, yeah.
Now, I'll be really honest. I'm aware that this happens. I don't know as many of the details. But Hazel is the woman who runs the program. She, and again, I think there's about, I don't know, 15 or so co-ops that that they do that for.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just gonna ask, what was the lady's name that you said did the feasibility study with you?
Kathy.
Kathy. You guys have any questions? Anybody have any questions? We can maybe let Kyle go and then
All good?
Chat.
chit chat over
All right.
here.
Thank you very much, Kyle. We'll be in touch again soon.
Thank you,
Good.
Cal.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a good night.
Okay, thank you.